A jailer claims to have caught Diddy writing letters in mysterious codes and performing occult rituals inside his cell. He states that the whole wing of prisoners near Diddy's cell is completely scared and that P. Diddy is making everyone's life a hell. Who are the real recipients of these messages, and how do unexplainable events outside the prison seem to be connected to their actions within the jail? What is happening with Diddy and with the world around you? In today's video, you will hear the full and disturbing account of this jailer who closely witnessed Diddy's darkest secrets. Get ready, because it all starts like this. I've been working for over 15 years as a jailer. I've seen everything. But nothing prepared me for what I witnessed at Diddy's cell. I usually do night rounds to make sure everything is quiet. Prisoners are usually sleeping or at most talking low. But Diddy, he's different. The first time I noticed something strange, it was about 2 in the morning. He was sitting on his bed with a rigid, almost still posture. At first glance, he seemed to be writing, but as I approached silently, I realized that he took long breaks, looked at the ceiling, and murmured something. I couldn't understand the words, but it sounded like an unknown language or something ritualistic. As the days passed, this has become a pattern. Always at dawn, he would take a small notebook, which, by the way, no one knows how he did. He wrote frantically for a few minutes, then stopped and passed his fingers over the texts, as if reading something sacred or forbidden. It was as if he was not alone there. There was a heavy, almost palpable energy. One night I created courage and took another step to watch better. I saw that he drew symbols on paper, figures I never saw before, and realizing that I was there, he looked up and stared at me. He said nothing, just looked at me. But that look gave me goosebumps, as if he knew something about me that I don't know myself. After that, I started to avoid spending a lot of time in front of his cell. After noticing Diddy's strange behavior at dawn, I decided to watch more carefully what he did with that notebook. Whenever he wrote, he seemed completely absorbed, as if he were in another world. In the beginning, I thought he was just scribbling, something common among the prisoners to pass the time. But over the days, I realized that this was much more elaborate. One night as he slept, I managed to approach enough to take a quick look at one of the leaves that was lying on the floor of the cell. What I saw made me intrigued. They were not common words or phrases, but a combination of letters, numbers, and disconnected symbols. They looked like codes. The letters did not form known words, and mixed with them, there were geometric signs and strange drawings. These were forms I never saw before, something between ancient astrological and written symbols. Some prisoners write to try to communicate with people outside, but what he wrote made no sense. More disturbing it was when I realized that some of these pages had marks, as if he pressed a pointed object over the paper, creating reliefs. In one of them, I saw a figure that looked like a kind of deformed star, surrounded by spiral inscriptions. I couldn't help thinking, would it be a kind of secret message? Even stranger was the fact that Diddy never handed these sheets to anyone. During regular inspections, I never found a letter sent or received. He kept everything meticulously, hiding the notebook in a dark corner of the cell. But here is the question: who is he writing for? And more important, these messages really need to be sent, or does he believe that something or someone already receives them otherwise? What also caught my attention was the moments when he read these letters. It was as if he were reviewing something very important with an absurd concentration. He moved his lips as he read, but the sound that came out was low and indecipherable, almost like a corner. It was scary, as if reciting some kind of enchantment. There was a pattern, as if each code were being activated only when pronounced. I have wondered, is this a type of code for someone outside? Or are these messages part of something bigger, something that goes beyond what we can understand? If the coded letters were already disturbing, which I found later, it was even more frightening. During my rounds, I began to notice that Diddy not only wrote these messages, but also seemed to do something that I can only describe as rituals inside the cell. At first, I thought he was just exercising or meditating, but I soon realized that there was a pattern and a purpose. One night, passing near his cell, I noticed a strange smell, like a mixture of burnt paper and something metallic, perhaps blood. When I looked through the small window of the door, I saw that he had designed symbols on the floor with what seemed to be gray. They were not random designs. The strokes were accurate, with geometric shapes that were perfectly connected. In the center, he had placed a small object. It looked like a piece of metal or stone and was kneeling in front of him, with his hands together as in a prayer. But that was not a normal prayer. He murmured something in a low tone, almost like a song, but the words made no sense. They were guttural, as if he were speaking in a very old or even invented language. As he spoke, the environment seemed to change. I don't know how to explain, but the cell seemed darker, even with the hallway lights on. It was as if the very energy of the place was absorbed by him. Another unsettling detail was when, on another night, he started clapping at a peculiar pace. It was a constant sequence, and each beat seemed to echo higher than it should. In the end, he raised his hands to the ceiling, as if invoking something, and was still for a few minutes. At this time, I couldn't look away, but I felt a shiver on my spine, as if something invisible was watching too. The strange thing is that some of the other prisoners, even in distant cells, seemed to notice these moments. They were absolutely silent when Diddy began their rituals. Usually, prison is a noisy place with shouts and conversations, but during these hours, everything stopped. It was as if everyone knew that something was happening and no one dared to interrupt. I started to think, are these rituals linked to the letters he writes? Would it be a way to amplify the power of these messages, or perhaps a form of direct communication with something? I don't know what's going on, but I can say that I never felt an energy as strange as emanating from his cell. The feeling of being observed does not abandon me, even when I leave that corridor. After witnessing the coded letters and rituals, a question does not leave my mind. Who are the recipients of these messages? Diddy never tried to send these letters through the normal channels, as other prisoners do. He never delivers anything to the guards to be taken out of prison. As far as I know, he doesn't even get visits. So why does he strive so hard to write these messages? The most disturbing thing is that it does not seem that these letters are for ordinary people. The symbols, codes, and even the way it manipulates the paper gives me the feeling that the recipient may not be someone who can simply take a phone or open an envelope. What if he believes these messages are read by something or someone who is beyond our understanding? I have already considered the hypothesis that he is trying to communicate with former partners or allies out of prison, people involved in the obscure business circulating around him before his arrest. But the messages I saw, with all those symbols and indecipherable standards, do not look like common instructions or requests for help. It is something deeper, as if he were asking for guidance or perhaps confirming some kind of plan. Once, during the routine inspection, I casually asked what he wrote. He did not respond directly, but gave me an enigmatic smile, as if I knew something I would never be able to understand. After that, I was even more suspicious. That was not just arrogance. It seemed a certainty that his words were coming where they needed to go, even without leaving the cell. Even worse it was when, in one of the letters, I realized something that looked like a name. I will not repeat here what was written, but the name seemed old, almost mythical, like something taken from a legend or a forbidden book. It was at this moment that I started to wonder if the real recipient of these messages is not here, on the physical plane. Another curious fact is how these activities coincide with events that occur outside prison. Recently, on a particularly strange day, he was writing frantically, as if he were possessed by an invisible urgency. Later that same day, we learned of an unusual incident in a nearby city, something that seemed like a coincidence, but I can't get out of my mind the possibility that everything is connected to. So who or what is receiving these messages? An accomplice, an organization, or perhaps something much more sinister? And most importantly, do these messages have any power beyond the role in which they are written? Diddy may be arrested, but it is evident that he has not lost his influence. From the moment he arrived here, I realized that things were different. Many prisoners who usually try to test the newcomers remained distant, almost as if they were afraid of him or knew something that made them back off. This is not a common reaction, especially in such an environment. What impresses me most is how it always seems to be a step ahead. He rarely speaks to the other detainees, but still seems to have an invisible protection net around him. I saw cases where prisoners involved in fights or tensions simply give up arguing near him. It is as if your presence exercised an authority that does not need words. I've seen very dangerous men inside, but the aura of power he conveys is different. It's subtle but undeniable. Even more curious is that, despite rarely interacting, he always has what he needs. Some items he has in his cell, such as the notebook and a peculiar appearance pen, make me question how he got it. Simple objects can be difficult to get inside without the right person helping. Does this raise the question, does he have accomplices in prison? Maybe even among the jailers themselves? Another point that is worth noting is that it does not seem to follow any of the typical dynamics of power within the prison. Here, there are always clear divisions, groups, factions, alliances, but Diddy operates out of it. He does not align with anyone, and yet no one dare to challenge him. This is extremely rare. It is as if it were a neutral but untouchable entity. There are also reports of prisoners who heard Diddy speak low at night, not codes or songs, but as if talking to someone. Only he is alone in the cell. A prisoner said he heard Diddy mention things that happened out of prison, such as recent events, but he couldn't know. That made me think, does it have a connection with the outside world in a way we don't understand? This influence and protection are not natural. There is something more happening here. I've seen other prisoners try to create an aura of power, but in his case, it is as if it wasn't something he needs to conquer or force. It is as if they were already in it, as part of who he is. The most disturbing thing is that there seems to be something deeper, something we can't see, but we all feel. The more I observe Diddy's behavior here in prison, the more I remember stories I heard about him before being arrested. It is not today that he is surrounded by mysteries. During his career, there has always been rumors about his involvement with secret societies, hidden symbolisms, and subliminal messages in his work. I confess that at the time, I found all this only part of the conspiracy theories. Now, living this closely, I'm not so sure anymore. The symbols he draws in the notebook and cell floor are strangely familiar. I remember musical clips and public events where Diddy appeared with images that some claim to have hidden meanings. Triangles, eyes, unusual geometric patterns, all this was part of his branding. But was that just that? And now, seeing him recreate these same symbols inside, I wonder if it was all part of something bigger. Another point that intrigues me is how he seemed to use music and the media as tools. Many people commented that he put hidden messages on his lyrics, something that would only be understood by those who knew how to read between the lines. It may seem crazy, but considering what I have already seen in prison, I begin to believe that he really dominates his own language, something that connects his actions today with what he did in the past. There are also stories of bizarre events at private parties he promoted. People who have been in these events say that he always controlled the environment, including the type of music, lighting, and even decorations. Many claim that there was an almost ritualistic feeling in everything. Now, here at the cell, he seems to continue this practice of creating symbolic scenarios, even without access to the same resources. The question is he just repeating what he did before, or is this all part of something bigger he has never stopped building? Enigmatic messages and symbolism have always been a constant in his life, but the difference now is that he is physically limited, or at least that's what we think. Does he use these practices to maintain a connection with what's out there? Or is he trying to reach something we can't even understand? Another detail is how people react to these symbolisms before. Some idolized him, others feared him. It seems that the energy he was projecting out there is the same one that is present here. Perhaps these messages have never been intended for the ordinary public, but to something or someone specific, a recipient he keeps trying to reach, inside or out of prison. The atmosphere in prison has changed since Diddy arrived. Something in it seems to move people, even those who pretend not to care. I've worked here for a while enough to know that fear is a powerful coin of exchange. But what Diddy causes is not the common fear of a dangerous or powerful man. It is something deeper, more primal. The prisoners do not talk about him, but you realize the silence and looks when his name is mentioned. Among the detainees, there is a kind of forced respect. No one dares to tease him or even look much toward him. Some even move away if it enters the courtyard during recreation time. And it is not because he is physically intimidating or because he has shown violence. It is as if there is a feeling that something invisible protects it, something that other prisoners prefer not to challenge. I've heard whispers. Some prisoners believe it is connected to forces that go beyond what we can see. One of them told me, a little scared, that one night heard Diddy muttering while he was alone in the cell. What he heard did not look like any known language, but said that soon after, he had a terrible nightmare that made him wake up screaming. Since then, he avoids passing near Diddy's cell. Among the jailers, the story is not much different. Many of my colleagues avoid his cell, especially during the night rounds. I've heard stories of guards who had the feeling of being observed even when he was on his back. Others reported strange dreams or felt inexplicable chills after interacting with him. Some started asking for shift transfer so as not to work in the same corridor. Once, a younger colleague tried to impose his authority, demanding that Diddy deliver the notebook where he writes his codes. He just looked at the guard with that enigmatic smile and said, "You don't want to know what is here." The guard froze. Since then, he doesn't even go through Diddy's cell. What scares me most is how these reactions happen without doing practically nothing. He doesn't have to threaten anyone. He doesn't have to raise his voice or cause confusion. His presence alone is enough to create a tension environment. What's worse is that no one can explain exactly why they feel that way, but everyone feels. To me, one of the strangest aspects about Diddy's behavior is how there seems to be a connection between what he does in the cell and events that happen out of prison. It may seem crazy, but I can't ignore the coincidences. There were at least 3 occasions when I realized this connection, and they were too scary to be a mere work of chance. The first time happened after a particularly intense dawn. Diddy spent hours writing frantically on his notebook, alternating between periods of murmurs and long silences. The air in the hall seemed heavier that night. The next day, reading the news, I saw that a massive drop in energy left a large part of the neighboring city in the dark for hours. The authorities said it was a technical problem, but the feeling that it was connected to what I saw in his cell made me restless. The second coincidence was even more disturbing. One night, he spent a considerable time drawing symbols on the floor with ashes or dust. I still don't know how he gets these materials. He seemed to be in a trance, muttering something incomprehensible as he traced the drawings. A few hours later, we learned that there was an inexplicable fire in an old building where no one should be. The firefighters said there was no apparent cause for the fire, but something about the moment made me associate directly to what I witnessed. The third time was what really made me scared. He was reciting something in that unknown language, but this time it seemed more intense, almost as if desperate. The energy in the hall was so dense that it seemed difficult until it breathed. The next morning, a great businessman, known to be involved in controversy and even mentioned in rumors about Diddy, was found dead in circumstances that have not yet been explained by the police. Coincidence or not, it made me realize that his actions may be somehow interfering outside these walls. The most disturbing thing is that he seems to know exactly what he is doing. One time, when I approached more than I should to try to understand what he was writing, he stopped, looked at me, and said something that I will never forget. Things move when they need it. It's the balance. I didn't understand what he meant, but sounded like a kind of warning. Have these rituals and codes have the power to influence the outside world? And if so, who or what is helping to do this? I can't prove anything, but the coincidences are so many that it is difficult to ignore. All of this makes me question how far its reaches and if we are really safe, even with him locked in here. These coincidences, the enigmatic codes, the rituals in the quiet of the night, all this leads us to a disturbing question: who or what is really behind Diddy's actions? Is he just acting for despair, or does he still have control over something much larger, even though he is stuck? What is clear is that the answers are not simple. There are many pieces in this puzzle that continue to intrigue us, and each new discovery seems to lead us to an even deeper mystery. But what about you? What do you think is happening? Are these letters and rituals an attempt to communicate with accomplices, a connection with something supernatural, or just the manifestation of a disturbed mind? Leave your comment below. We want to know your opinion. Is Diddy really lost control, or is something that goes beyond our understanding? And if you liked this video and want more content like this, don't forget to like it. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any update. We see each other in the next mystery.